It's Thursday, May 29th. Welcome to Capitol Tonight. I'm Kevin Frey, keeping Susan's seat warm while she has some time off. Legislation seeking to limit the expansion of natural gas in favor of renewable energy is picking up steam. Yes, pun fully intended. The HEAT Act would limit gas infrastructure expansion, lay out plans to transition away from natural gas, and cap rates for low to moderate income New Yorkers. Jack Arpey joins us live from the Capitol with more on this. Jack.
Hey, Kevin. Well, the HEAT Act has passed in the Senate multiple times, and State Senator Liz Krueger, who carries the bill in the Senate, told me she's confident that it will do so again, but it has consistently struggled in the Assembly, and Krueger told me earlier this afternoon that she feels a slight concession that's being made to kind of satisfy a Western New York company may do the trick as the days tick down toward the end of session.
I'm feeling pretty optimistic we might be able to, even though there's so little time left this year, get an amended version of this bill through both houses.
The key word being amended. State Senator Liz Krueger says this may finally be New York Heat's year. The bill, which seeks to align the state's utility policy with a transition away from natural gas, is in the process of being retrofitted to address concerns over transition requirements.
We're amending the bill so that the utility can opt out if they wish. We think the vast majority of utilities will not opt out.
But there's one that Krueger says likely will. National Fuel of Western New York has been a thorn in the side of advocates. And in both the Senate and Assembly, Western New York members have put up much of the opposition. Well, not thrilled. Krueger says given that the bill seeks to find alternative energy sources for communities, and there are few alternatives to gas in the region.
We're saying, okay, we can work around the rest of the state, get this done, and then years later, move to that section of the state.
Assemblymember Joanne Simon is the bill's new sponsor in the lower chamber, where the HEAT Act has been a tough sell for multiple years.
Did you want to take that on that has struggled?
I don't know.
But despite the persistent headwinds and that resistance from Western New York members, she feels a passage of an amended version is within reach.
I think that we'll be able to come to some agreement to do a good amount of the HEAT Act.
The potential concession comes after groups like the Alliance for a Green Economy have come out swinging against National Fuel. A study released this month found the company was an outlier in New York and that they lack an electricity portfolio and generate much of their business from fracking.
It has a financial interest in keeping us on fracked gas. And this is in direct contradiction to, where we're going in New York State.
But groups like the Business Council have concerns that run beyond just one company.
It would force the state to make major decisions about restricting the gas distribution system with unforeseen and we think damaging impacts on the state's economy.
As well as the potential impacts of the bill's neighborhood transition projects.
The likelihood that homeowners are going to have to make investments that they certainly were not planning for.
But Krueger points out that neighborhoods are not without choice, and the state plans to work with residents to secure affordable options.
Now we make very explicit in the bill the process that you go through where a specific community must agree to this for themselves and then move forward.
And we did reach out to National Fuel to get their take on all of this. Kevin, we have not yet heard back.
All right, Jack Arpey for us at the Capitol. Thank you, sir. The legislature has taken steps to expand protections for New York tenants in recent years, but many upstate cities are struggling to take advantage of the changes. That's why several Democratic lawmakers are pushing a bill to make it easier for localities outside of the 5 boroughs to declare a housing emergency and opt in to rent stabilization. Kate Lisa spoke with stakeholders on all sides of this debate, and she joins me now in studio. Hey, Kate.
Hey there, Kevin. Absolutely. So as housing continues to be a top affordability issue with stagnating wages and rising rent costs, lawmakers are at the forefront of housing policy say that they are focused to empower local governments to take things into their own hands. Cities, towns, and villages outside of New York City are currently able to adopt rent stabilization if they have a housing vacancy of 5% or less and declare a housing emergency. But advocates and lawmakers say vacancy studies are costly and use unreliable data.
They're counting buildings that you can't live in, buildings that have unsafe unfits, buildings that aren't on the market. How do you determine that they're marketed? The study is flawed, and the REST Act answers all of those questions.
Advocates are pushing lawmakers to pass a bill called the Rent Emergency Stabilization for Tenants Act. that would let localities use public data to demonstrate a housing emergency without a study and determine the size and age of buildings covered under limited rent hikes. 9 upstate cities have tried to opt into rent stabilization via a vacancy study since 2019. Only Kingston has been successful, but the Ulster County city continues to face legal challenges.
So many downstate people moved into Kingston, and they weren't working in Kingston. They were working outside of Kingston, so it's just skewed everything upwards.
Kingston Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch says the council continues to fight to keep rent costs under control. Sponsor Senator Brian Kavanaugh says the current law dates back to 1973 and must be changed, and housing scarcity shouldn't be the only factor to determine an emergency. He added municipalities must consider local factors when opting in to rent stabilization.
You didn't have hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers living in hotels and homeless shelters in 1973. You didn't have rates of dilapidated housing in some of our localities that you have now.
But landlords aren't pleased with the proposal, arguing rent stabilization limits renter options for affordable housing and doesn't create new units. Harriet Baldwin, co-chair of the Legislative Committee of the Apartments of New York, says the REST Act would degrade the quality of housing and hasn't worked in cities where rent control is widespread.
New York City, like San Francisco, like Chicago, not places that come to mind as affordable paradises for renters.
Lawmakers say they're ready to go head-to-head with landlords, arguing the bill doesn't impose rent regulations in any part of the state, but it will all depend on what leadership wants to prioritize in the next few weeks.
That just seems like creating a little bit of the Wild West in a way that's going to hurt tenants in the long run, even more than it hurts housing providers.
Lawmakers who are leading these housing conversations are also fighting to get other proposals over the finish line in the next 2 weeks that would expand housing protections and programs for elderly New Yorkers, and a bill that would make it easier for churches and houses of worship to build affordable housing on their properties. Kevin.
All right, Kate Lisa Forrest, thank you so much. New tonight, an update in the aftermath of the 3-week prison strike. We've now learned there's 3,000 National Guard members still working in state correctional facilities. Officials with the National Guard say those members are working at 34 of the 42 state prisons on a voluntary basis. No timeline for their withdrawal has been given, but Governor Hochul has said they will remain in place until the Department of Corrections can get staffing levels back up. Coming up, former EPA Regional Administrator Judith Enck joins me to talk about the end of session push to pass a bill aimed at reducing plastic packaging. Please do stay with us. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Last night, the Plastic Reduction and Recycling Act passed the state Senate, but still needs to pass through the Assembly. The legislation aims to reduce packaging waste and boost recycling infrastructure. Advocates are working to get this over the finish line this session. We're joined now by Judith Enck, former regional administrator of the EPA under the Obama administration, and then also president of Beyond Plastics. Judith, good to see you. Thanks for joining us here. So let's start with just this bill in general. What is the goal of this? What do you hope this would accomplish should it become law?
Well, the goal is to reduce plastic pollution, and this is the strongest plastic reduction bill in the country. And Senator Pete Harckham and New York Assemblymember Deborah Glick have really emerged as national leaders and voices on the urgent issue of plastic pollution. It's a health issue, it's a climate change issue. Our rivers are filled with plastics that get into the ocean. And it's also a taxpayer issue, because right now, you and I as taxpayers spend millions of dollars every year getting rid of single-use excess packaging. So this bill would require that plastic and other single-use packaging be reduced by 30% over 12 years. It's pretty reasonable. The original bill was a 50% reduction over 10 years. This bill gets rid of 17 of the most toxic chemicals used in packaging. Again, 16,000 chemicals are used to make plastic. So I don't know about you, but I don't want lead and mercury and PFAS chemicals in packaging, especially food packaging. The bill also puts a modest fee on packaging, so that money is a new revenue source to local governments to improve waste reduction and recycling programs. And then finally, we prohibit the really risky technology called chemical recycling or advanced recycling to count as recycling in the statute.
How confident are you this is going to actually be able to get done this session?
Well, I'm really pleased that Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins allowed the bill to come up for a vote last night in the Senate. It passed. It's through 2 of the committees in the Assembly, but we are facing ferocious opposition from little mom and pop companies like Exxon. So I don't know what the outcome is going to be honest.
Well, let me get you to engage with some of that, because you have the business organizations arguing that this will only drive inflation by forcing companies to essentially pay more to handle some of this. What do you say to those folks?
Right now, we're paying as taxpayers, and we have no input on whether we get a product that has all this excess packaging, or is it slimmed down? And actually, less packaging can also potentially save them money. They've made 2 arguments. One is that consumer prices may go up. Consumer Reports, a trusted source, says prices won't go up. So who are you going to believe? Chemical companies or Consumer Reports? Their second point, which I think is just not credible, is that products will leave store shelves, but no big company is going to give up the New York market. It's just too big. They will have 12 years to reduce their packaging by 30%. New York's landfills are filling up rapidly. We have 25 landfills, 10 really polluting garbage incinerators. So as taxpayers, we are footing this bill, but the responsibility for the cost really should be with the companies that make all of this excess packaging.
So while we wait to see exactly where this bill lands in the Assembly, I want to ask you about some of the news of the day. We saw overnight a new commissioner for the DEC get confirmed. What do you make of the choice?
Well, I think Amanda Lefton is an excellent choice to head the DEC. She's very experienced. She is committed to environmental protection. Her job will not be an easy one because of the federal assault on the environment. I previously worked at the EPA during the Obama administration, and seeing what's happening in Washington with Lee Zeldin is really discouraging. And so what Commissioner Lefton and Governor Hochul and the legislature are going to have to do is figure out ways not only to make up for all of the funding cuts, but to be much more aggressive on enforcement of environmental laws, particularly on climate change. Because New York has some pretty good laws on the books, but not showing enough progress.
And just to put a fine point on it, I should say, before we get into the alphabet soup of everything, we're talking about the Department of Environmental Conservation.
Sorry about that.
To be clear, no, that's my fault. While I had
so to be just quick, I think she's going to be a terrific commissioner.
Yeah. While I have you looking back on your own old stomping grounds, you just kind of hinted at this. We have seen Lee Zeldin. I mean, he entered this position as the EPA commissioner, saying he was going to deregulate. We have seen some movement on that, particularly on an issue that's very important to upstate, PFAS and these forever chemicals within the last couple of weeks. As they move to essentially roll back some of the regulations on these chemicals, is he living up to the goals and the mission of the EPA?
No, and he's also going to lose a lot of lawsuits because he's not living up to the statutory requirements of federal environmental laws. Lee Zeldin will do whatever Donald Trump tells him to do, and that's a problem. I've seen interviews with Administrator Zeldin where he's talking about energy dominance. That means generating a lot of fossil fuel energy, and they want to export it to other countries, not even be energy independent. Energy dominance is not in the Clean Air Act or the Safe Drinking Water Act. He says he wants to get back to basics, and yet he wants to relax drinking water regulations. This is the most anti-environmental, anti-public health administration in the history of the EPA.
We saw certainly some progress in terms of investments, and we're going to touch on that in just a second, in the green energy environmental space, particularly during the last administration under Biden. How much do you think, at least the moves thus far, and obviously as you hinted at, there's going to be some blockades probably in the courts, but how much could the moves that the EPA is taking right now set us back on avoiding, climate catastrophe?
Right. Oh, the timing of the Trump administration cannot be worse because we don't have a lot of time to deal with the climate catastrophe. So we will see more greenhouse gas emissions coming out of smokestacks, and we'll see less clean renewable energy. I mean, Governor Hochul thankfully was able to intervene and get the offshore wind project off the shore of Long Island reinstated, But the media reporting is that she had to do that and agree to facilitate the siting of more fracked gas pipelines.
Yeah.
So that's not really helping us on climate change.
Well, the last thing I wanted to touch on was this, and we have a little less than a minute to go here. House Republicans in D.C. just passed this massive spending and priority bill that backs up the Trump agenda. And part of that includes rolling back, or at least putting kind of restrictions on some of these green energy tax credits that were part of the Inflation Reduction Act that was Biden's cornerstone bill. What impact are you expecting that to have on some of the industry jobs here in New York? I mean, we saw some New York Republicans pushing back on these provisions, particularly Representative Garbarino on Long Island.
I really appreciated him doing that. He was out of the mainstream in his anti-environmental party. I think it's going to hurt New York. We're going to have dirtier air. We're going to have more asthma attacks because we're not going to see clean energy develop at the pace that's needed, and we're going to lose jobs. Renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuel these days, and that also is not fully understood in the New York State Legislature. They really should be focusing on the HEAT Act and solar developments, which they're not. But this is going to have decades-long impacts, if not century-long impacts, in terms of the climate crisis and our need for clean air here in New York.
All right, Judith, we're going to leave it there. Judith Enck, president of Beyond Plastics, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
Coming up, we'll head south to Washington to get the latest on President Trump's tariff agenda, plus some details on Harvard University's legal win. Stay with us. Welcome back to Capitol Tonight. We turn now to Washington and a dizzying back and forth over President Donald Trump's trade agenda. Two federal courts blocking most of the president's tariffs before an appeals court reinstated them, at least for now. The Trump White House is pledging to keep fighting. All this as companies and small business owners struggle to keep up with the changes. Our national political reporter Taylor Popolars is tracking the latest from the White House.
President Donald Trump's trade agenda has been on a roller coaster this week. On Wednesday night, the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled that the president overstepped his authority when he used a 1977 Emergency Powers Act to impose the reciprocal tariffs he unveiled on April 2nd. Then on Thursday afternoon, a separate federal judge here in Washington made a similar ruling. Then, later Thursday afternoon, a federal appeals court reinstated the tariffs for now. Moments after the reinstatement, we asked White House trade advisor Peter Navarro how small business owners should handle the constant back and forth. What's your message to them right now? How are they supposed to keep businesses normal amidst hourly changes?
We're in a point where in this history of this country, if we do not shift structurally to a world where the world treats us fairly, we will never have this opportunity again. And a lot of this back and forth is the result of the Democrats working with the globalist rhino Wall Street people to try to stop the Trump agenda.
Earlier Thursday, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt accused the federal judges in the initial rulings of brazen abuse and going rogue.
The courts should have no role here. There is a troubling and dangerous trend of unelected judges inserting themselves into the presidential decision-making process.
Navarro also said small business owners should assume the administration will find a way to keep the tariffs in place, even if it means getting the Supreme Court involved. He also said the administration is continuing to negotiate with multiple countries to try to reach trade deals. Reporting at the White House, Taylor Popolars, Spectrum News.
Also playing out in the courts, Harvard University picks up another legal win, a federal judge extending a block on the Trump administration's attempt to bar the school from enrolling foreign students. That decision comes as the university holds its commencement and several speakers directly address the challenges facing the school. Our Reuben Jones has more.
Welcome.
Harvard University President Alan Garber, who is leading the school as it pushes back against attacks from the Trump administration, is greeted with a standing ovation at the school's commencement Thursday. It came the same day a federal judge dealt another blow to the Trump administration. U.S. District Court Judge Allison Burroughs indefinitely extended an order blocking the administration's attempt to bar the school from enrolling foreign students, saying, "I want to maintain the status quo to allow Harvard to continue hosting international students on visas at this time." The Trump administration has argued for changes to Harvard's governance. It's accused the school of being a hotbed of liberalism and failing to protect Jewish students from harassment. Justice Department attorneys on Thursday indicated the case may be moot after the Department of Homeland Security told the court it sent Harvard a notice of intent to withdraw the school from the Student and Exchange Visitors Program on Wednesday. Harvard was the first university to reject the Trump administration's demands, saying they threaten the school's autonomy. Not far from the court's ruling at the university commencement Thursday, a number of speakers defended the school.
Our university is certainly imperfect, but I am proud to stand today alongside our graduating class, our faculty, and our president with the shared conviction that this ongoing project of Veritas is one worth defending.
Harvard's battle comes as the State Department announced Wednesday it will revoke the visas of some Chinese students, targeting those it says with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying in critical fields. About a quarter of all foreign students in the U.S. are from China. Now, the country has called the plan politically motivated and discriminatory. The U.S. State Department, meanwhile, says the policies put America first. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Capitol Tonight.
That's it for us. One day closer to Susan's return. I'm Kevin Frey. Thanks for watching Capitol Tonight, where you'll always have a seat at our table. Have a good evening.